meeting of the Audit and Transparency Committee. I'm Councillor Jared Hargreaves, Chair of the Audit and Transparency Committee, and I welcome everybody here tonight. It's a big gathering, so welcome to everybody here tonight. It's obviously the meeting to be in tonight, so welcome. I think it will be appropriate for us to start with 72 seconds silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. So I'll ask you please to stand and join me.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any apologies for absence?
No apologies for
Thank you very much indeed. But the minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated. We've agreed as a true record.
I wanted to say that I was not present.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Well, not everybody happy? We'll come to any issue as a true record. Right, it's Simon. Thank you very much. Any matters that we want to raise now that are not being covered in the agenda?
Sorry, I am a trustee of Clement James, although I have no keen interest, but it is something I'm going to file later. Something.
Okay.
Sorry.
Can I now ask then, does any member, can we just do any issues that you are not on the agenda that you want to raise from the minutes? Thank you. Okay, does any member have a disclosable pecuniary interest in any matter before the committee this evening? Councillor Garden?
So I'm a trustee of Clement James board meeting, which is referred to in one of the papers, which I want to clarify.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Chair, can we have a Part B AOB, please, afternoon? Thank you.
Yes.
The standing declaration of interest with Standard Chartered Bank, which is mentioned in the Treasury.
I don't need to see you enough one to need you to.
I have not recused myself.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So we now go to item number A4, Treasury Report. I would like Dawson to present Treasury Report, please. Matthew.
field trips, John.
All right. So you have the paper A4 in front of you, and this is what information. Then we will answer any questions.
So looking at page 13, general economic background, we have quite a volatile scenario, full of uncertainty currently. CPI inflation, we're talking relatively high rates. As mentioned, Para 2.1, the latest rate is 9.9, which is at August 22. And this is driven mainly by prices of energy and food. We're awaiting the government's proclamation with regard to relief for energy bills. which would bring that future rate of inflation down quite considerably. But we'll wait for that outcome. Para 2.3 GDP, latest figures there. In fact, the latest GDP figure was announced this week as of August this year, so a contraction of -3%, and worries of economic recession. In terms of bank rate, we have a current rate of 2.25, which was set in September, 22nd September. The next meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee is on the 3rd of November, and we are expecting a rise at that meeting. Table 1 on page 14. These are forecasts provided by Arden Close since publication of this particular forecast. Gilt yields, and therefore the cost of government borrowing has risen quite considerably. You can see on the bottom row the 50-year gilt yield rate, to which our borrowing rate is linked, 100% correlation. So we pay future borrowing in accordance with gilt yields. So you can see September 22, or December 22, the estimate is 2.3. You can add 0.8 to that to get the cost of borrowing from the Public Works Loans Board, which would make it 3.1. This afternoon's level is just a little over 5%, so you can see in that time there's been almost a 2% increase in future cost of borrowing. Table 3.1, these are the positions with regard to borrowing and cash portfolio. 30th of June, 234 million of borrowing and 170 million pounds worth of cash investments, and a breakdown on the following page as to the various types of counterparty banks, money market funds, and the corporate bond fund, FINA fund. So the strategy still for 22-23 was based on the assumption that rates would rise during the current financial year. In fact, they've risen slightly faster than we thought and was expected, and I think will continue to rise as the year progresses. In terms of the rate of interest that we've achieved, as at the first quarter, 0.88%, which is a considerable rise from last year, and it beats the benchmark of 0.78%. We are actually achieving for 12 months deposits rates upwards of 4.5% at the moment. So that will have a considerable impact on the amount of investment income the council achieves this year. Treasury borrowing, in accordance with the strategy and advice from the consultant, it's really to borrow as and when required, as needed. We're not keen on incurring a cost of carry, obviously with rates considerably higher at the moment, but with expectation that those could reduce after the period of volatility in which we find ourselves at the moment. If things settle down, we would look to borrow in the future when rates are lower, and that is the current consultancy advice, is to borrow as needed and required. So we will obviously await events and see if those borrowing rates reduce in the future. Capital expenditure, forecast capital spending in the current year, just over 200 million. And then finally, paragraph 7, compliance with treasury limits. Those are listed in Appendix A, and all of those prudential requirements have been met and achieved in the current quarter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions you'd like to ask? Could you just, it's a different one, is it? The impact of what we've got here, you touched on sort of investment money, but what, crystal ball, isn't it? But what's the impact on us for what's going to be going forward?
I'd say the main impact is when we are required to borrow in the future. Our borrowing rates are linked directly to the market. Market sets the rate. The rate of interest is a function basically of the price of gilts. And if that price of that gilt falls, there's not sufficient demand if investors are leaving the gilt market because of uncertainty and unhappiness with the way that the government is conducting its business at the moment. Gilt price falls, therefore there's a converse relationship. The yield or the rate of interest rises, and that's what we've seen over the last couple of weeks. There's also the theory that it's down to the interest rates that's set by the Bank of England. Most commentators and most of the experts agree that it's a result of government plans to cut taxation. So whilst this level of uncertainty exists, I would say we will see those high rates and they could go higher in the future.
Just a quick question then on the gilts. If it's likely that the borrowing rate will increase in the future, could there be an argument for borrowing now, marking out cash and deposits, to save us from having to borrow at higher rates that we probably can see down the barrel again to come?
Yes, and it's something we are looking at every day. So, for example, this afternoon, actually, since this morning, the rate has fallen. So there's a slight bit of confidence that's crept back into the market. So we are looking twice a day, every day, because these rates are published in the morning and then first thing in the afternoon, and we check them every time. Certainly, if the opportunity presents itself, we would look to recommend a tranche of borrowing, and then, as you say, invest that in cash markets, which are relatively high.
Councillor Gardner, I know you sort of wanted a position from March, really.
I think I've heard everything I need to.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, so this is my area of expertise, surprisingly. But worst possible scenario, I don't want to think about that, but the worst possible scenario that the economy continues to collapse. How does that affect us? Are we bulletproof to any kind of extent? And if we want to be building homes or whatever it is, and using this 200 million forecast of borrowing, that just makes it almost impossible, doesn't it, to calculate how much these projects could cost. It could be a 3-year project. Is it actually very risky to even entertain that kind of thing at the moment? Should we just hang on for a few months and see what happens?
Yes, I mean, certainly when those projects are appraised, there are future assumptions built into the model as to what future rates of interest will be and the cost of capital for those projects. And certainly,
some have gone up 20% already, apparently. Some of our projects.
yes, and if rates rise suddenly without a lot of notice, as we've seen, it can cause difficulty. We do have the Deputy Director of Finance who can comment first.
So yeah, just to kind of follow on from what you're saying, we're seeing a high level of inflation, particularly capital programming, but not just on the new homes, but also across particularly the HRAs. There's a lot of investment going to there. We aren't at the point of changing any of the schemes at the moment, but we do keep a really active view on what the cost implications are. So we're currently just picking up on the cost of borrowing, etc. We're doing quite a radical review of the capital programme at the moment, just to look at, because if we're going to borrow and it is as costly as it's proving to be, we need to be absolutely sure that we're investing in the right things. But part of that review is also looking at what could be the implications if some of those schemes are costing up to 20% more. And it is not across every single scheme in the capital programme, but particularly the construction side and the housing side, we are seeing the tenders come back. So the results of that review will probably come forward to a report in December. But it, no longer is it just looking at, which schemes you do or you don't do. You almost need to have a relook at the existing schemes to almost scenario plan in the instance that inflation is so high and our tender prices do come to 20%. So there's no changes planned at the moment, but absolutely we've got our eye.
Do you need my question now? At the last audit meeting, there was a list of our borrowing at the moment and what it was costing. Are those fixed rates or actually are those variable and so have they all gone up? So is it costing us more to service the existing debt that we have?
No, all of the rates in the current debt portfolio are fixed rates, so they won't.
And we've got some very favourable rates on those.
It is around new borrowing, isn't it, that is our biggest risk at the moment. And you know, that is a discussion that we'll have at the time about what the right thing is to do, and with the advice of our external advisors, whether borrowing is required or not, particularly when we've got the balances that we have.
Okay, so I think the message is we're all sharing the concerns and need to be kept updated, please, and changes particularly, and the impact that it has on our service delivery. So that was for information. Just like everybody to note that, and move on now to item number 5, Council Pension Fund Statement of Accounts, 21-22 Annual Governance Statement for approval. Thank you very much. Quite a chunky piece of work here.
It is, yeah, and I won't say no, but I'll just say a couple of words to introduce because it dovetails quite nicely with obviously the agenda item afterwards. So the committee saw the draft accounts back in the July meeting, so we published on the council website by the deadline. I know you asked an awful lot of questions on the draft accounts back at that committee, and we picked up those hopefully as part of the action tracker, but also as part of the final accounts as well. What you're seeing today are the final accounts that have now gone through the audit, which is almost complete. I think we've got a couple of last minute outstanding items, which I'm sure the boards can both sort of talk to under the next item. I guess the thing to flag for me is you might hear quite often tonight us referring to infrastructure statutory override, and you might hear us refer to it, and you might also hear Grant Thornton refer to it. So I suppose it's just really, and Livna and Paul can come in, it's really to say that really is something that is out of the control of the council. So you might have had an update earlier. So it's an update on the code of practice that we're waiting for. That's now not expected until the end of November. I think at the earliest, it's fair to say. That is around the accounting treatment and the infrastructure of it. So if you hear that referred to quite a few times over the course of the next half an hour or so under both of these items, that's really got that referred to. But I suppose the point that I wanted to stress was that's really out of our control. So I think we're in a good position where we've got our final accounts due, we're coming to committee in October, really good position compared to a lot of other local authorities. But there is just this caveat that I have to say that might prevent us from issuing any opinion. So I will stop there. If you turn over the page on page 22, the key changes between the draft accounts and the final accounts. Really, we haven't repeated them in this report because I think they're set out quite clearly in Appendix C of the audit findings, and Grant Thornton will take us through those. Largely presentational changes, and I just really wanted to conclude with just my biggest thanks on record actually to both Livna, the finance team, and everybody involved, but also to Grant Thornton. I just think the way that we work through both the audit, all credit to both sides of the table, so to speak. So I do think we're in a really good position going forward from here. So that's all, but I'm happy to take any questions. I appreciate you might have questions onto the next item as well.
Do you want to do the next item and then roll them into 2, or would you have any specific questions under item number 5?
Actually on the accounts themselves.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, just a few. The first thing I suppose, we had the public inspection from the 4th of July to the 12th of August, which is really a holiday period, and is that the normal thing to do? I'd also be interested to know what the 2 queries were from members of the public. And then I was quite curious on page 80. Again, it's the staffing. I mean, basically 10% of the workforce left. We had compulsory redundancy in 3 departments. But the overall headcount increased by 15%, and we're paying quite a lot in terms of redundancies. I just wondered what had given rise to that. And then on related party transactions, we had people that weren't returning declarations, but we relied on the register for those. How can we be certain that the register's up to date if people are not returning declarations?
No, that's fair, you want to deal with those, yeah.
Yeah,
sorry,
backwards, yeah. We do issue several reminders to try and get everyone's declaration forms back. But what we also liaise closely with legal services to get dates for the most recent updates to the statutory register of interest. So we're able to rely and get some assurance from both of those places. In terms of I think almost all of the declaration, the statutory register of members' interests are up to date, have been updated in the last few months, following the file that Glenn Parker sent out to investors asking if those could be looked at. So there are only two returning councillors who haven't submitted their declarations. And the rest of them, it's an unusual year for us because obviously we've had the election in May, and as a result, it's very difficult to get submissions from those councillors who return to the council.
There was a change over this year. Yeah.
I did wonder actually, just on that, whether you could look, because the elections come up every 4 years, whether in the year preceding the election you actually could look at some accelerated way of getting the declarations before the May elections, because the declaration's retrospective.
We did actually do that. We actually issued the 22-23 for the period to the election day and asked, and there were a couple of them that completed and submitted the current year's declaration for that short period. So we did try that as well. We had a limited response.
And there was a former whip trying to chase people on that. It's not easy. But we have a duty to councillors and we need to take that seriously.
And it is a recommendation that will come out of the audit findings. So, we'll constantly look at more innovative ways to ensure that we get that 100%. But absolutely, we know that it's a risk. It's just a bigger risk in the election year. But absolutely, we'll constantly look at ways to improve that. And also making sure that picking up the alignment with the declaration and the register of interest as well, making sure that's up.
As part of the audit, we also search Company's House for all the members to make sure that the Company's House are consistent with the accounts.
I wonder actually if it's just a bit too nice sometimes. Maybe you just need to get a bit tougher with it. You have that table outside the council chamber. I think you did all you could do.
Yeah, and we may, hopefully you don't mind me saying this, but hopefully going forward, just be a bit harder, more onerous with the widths of the parties, etc., to help us to get that 100% response. Yeah. Should we do the public inspection one? Yeah.
So public
But you say, should we do the public housing?
On public inspection, we had two very detailed requests for information, which we submitted all of the information requested together. I think one had about 36 bits of information, another one had a similar amount, slightly less, I think. They tended to focus on Grenfell and legal costs. So there's a lot of information about some of the instances, which firms we've been using, and how much it's cost around media, publicity and so on, and subject access requests. So we provide more of the information. It was quite a collaborative because it covered various services across the entire council, not just finance. A lot of the information was qualitative as well. So we submitted that and we didn't hear anything back. There was no subsequent requests for follow-ups.
There was no theme in the two, there was only two, so.
No, it literally, the focus was around that.
And sorry, there was one final question. Yeah, I think it was very similar to the question that you asked on the draft accounts. On redundancies, in terms of both the increase in the numbers, but also I think you picked up on the increase in the headcount FTE. So if I cover that off first, so the establishment has gone up. Part of that is some services, particularly within housing management, have tubered in during the year, which would account for some of the headcount, but we can get a detailed breakdown for you. On the redundancies, in terms of the costs have gone up. So if we look at page 301, that was the response that we provided to your the question that you raised
Sorry,
last
I'm
time.
confusing myself.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So all redundancies do go through an adjudication panel, which we have now, so they're all subject to review by both finance and HR. So half of the total of the exit costs of the 2.1 million actually relate to the pension strain, which is a cost that we can't control, and is for anybody aged 55 and 60. We can get a fuller response. We don't feel that it's excessively high, so it has gone up since last year in terms of the numbers. What we would say is I think we're going to see perhaps increases in that going forward. So when the council's got such a difficult financial position, staffing, structures and etc. are all being looked at as part of our challenge going forward. So some of those will be as a result of some of the savings that we've generated at the start. But as a committee, I probably just want to kind of put down the foundations that it might be a trend that we may see in future years, particularly if the council is under quite significant financial.
Can I just follow up on that? Yeah. Because on 78, page 78, the deputy chief executive, I mean that,
Yeah.
have you got that? The borough pension contribution was eye watering, in terms of 447 100,000. So I think my question is, are payments for redundancy and pension considered in round? I appreciate it's more an HR question, but when decisions are made about redundancies, do people who are making those decisions know what the cost is going to be? For example, if somebody had thought this would be a redundancy that was 109,000, instead the actual cost is just short of $500,000, actually it might make a difference in terms of a decision.
Yeah, and we so the adjudication panel, when they consider a redundancy request, they will see essentially the payback period. It's kind of how we refer to it, and we have a payback period on average of 2 years that we say well redundancy should follow. But I appreciate this one, and it was picked out, I think, at the last meeting in the draft accounts. I think it's probably more appropriate if they can view if I get a written response from HR and data finance together, if that's okay, just to pick up on this particular case, because I know it was picked up as part of the draft accounts as well.
I think it would just help to understand if actually the process might be changed so that it's aware at a higher level, at an earlier level, than the adjudication. Thank you.
Councillor Denko.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about the movement in reserve statement. You know what I mean, on page 20. If I have this right, the total usable reserves are 291 million.
Is this page should be
We've got two page numbers.
It's the, have you got them both?
There it is.
Yeah, there are two numbers, it's page 20 of
The
the,
account.
of second document, sorry. So what page movement and reserves, it's 50, sorry, the number is 50.
No, page 49.
49, sorry. Page 49. Movement in reserves.
Yes. Oil there.
Okay, thank you, sorry about
Arrive.
because I've made all my notes on a bit copy. So if I have this right, our total usable reserves, I know that's not spending money, I do know that, is £291 million. And then if I have that correctly, I think I heard that we, that our cash reserve, I've got that right, was about 132 or something. So just if if that is correct, we are now back up to 300 million usable reserves. When we last had that, which was before the fire, we were retrospectively criticised for having large reserves and cutting back on other things. So is this a case, if I have this correct, Hannah, you'll tell me in a minute, I got it wrong. If we have indeed got our reserves are back up to that healthy level, if you want to call it that, can't we dispute any service reductions, cuts, efficiencies that are coming out of the line? Because we're clearly, I know we have debts, I don't understand that, but actually we're doing very well in our useful reserves. Is that fair?
So the figure that we should be looking at is the first one in the general fund here, 196.5 million.
Yep.
Which is analysed in note 7, movements in earmarked reserves. The other two amounts you've got, the 400 and 291, are capital receipts, which are obviously earmarked for just capital, financial capital fund, and the housing revenue account, which is ring fenced. So the earmarked reserves we've actually got is 196.5 million. And within that, if we look at note 7, even within there, there's quite a bit that actually we can't use. So one of the things is we've got an amount of 54 million collection fund reserve. That's not actually allowed to be used in anything other than repaying financing payments being made to the fee sectors or collection fund business. So that isn't really usable. So it takes you down to around 131 million, which is analysed in the table at the start of note 7. And even within that 131 million, you have certain things like schools reserves, which are ring fenced.
Yeah.
So it's actually a lot less than the 291. You're looking at circa about 100 million.
Okay.
And just to add to that, so the 132 that I think that you're referring to, that Phil mentioned, will be part of the balances that you're looking at here.
It's
in
already included.
Yeah,
It's
it's
not
already
separate.
included in that. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's not as large as what the picture is painted. And just to follow on, just looking at, so we're on page 60 of the wider pack. So Living has picked up particularly schools, but there are some other reserves, like the Grenfell Reserve, that is particularly ring-fenced. It will be fully committed by the end of 2024. Public health, which there's quite tight restrictions on car parking. So there, we do have a prudent level of reserves. I think a level of reserves that means that we are financially resilient. I suppose what I would just say is our intention is never to use reserves to balance budget, because it was only ever a one-year solution.
Well, we know that, sorry, revenue underspends going to reserves, so it's the same money, it's been rebranded.
Yeah. So the revenue underspends will go into the budget stabilisation.
And then it's money we can't use. So sorry, I just want to get it clear, because this is something that has always concerned me. And actually, former councillor Moylan used to talk about this. But the way we budget, we maybe overestimate in some cases, and then the underspends go into capital reserves that we can spend as we like, but we can't ever. It's the same money, just rebadged. So I've never understood that argument actually.
So I can only talk about what we've done since I've been here in the last 4.5 years. I can't make any judgment about anything previously. So any underspends that have happened over the last 4 years that I've been here with the council haven't gone into a capital reserve. They've gone into the budget stabilisation reserve, which you're looking at on page 60.
Yes.
We haven't had to draw down from that reserve, admittedly.
So
However,
we could, if we could. I'm just worried about any
Yeah.
potential cuts efficiencies coming up. So we could use the budget stabilisation reserve for that.
It can be used, and I would say from an officer's perspective, we've always anticipated having to use that reserve. When funding changes, we are expecting quite a significant shift in government funding. To be honest, we were expecting it 4 years ago when I started, so I've probably been saying the same thing for the last 4 years. So that has always been our reserve that we said would smooth out some of that cliff edge that Kensington in particular could experience when the government changes its funding. But just to assure you, that is absolutely a revenue reserve. In the last 4 years, we haven't put any any of that underspend into a capital reserve.
As I just said, the reserves is always confusing.
Yeah.
And I know we have to put it in certain places for the accounts, but can we do an idiot guide? For me,
Yes.
nobody else.
Thank you.
Because it is confusing and figures get bandied around that are probably meaningful in some degree, but meaningless in other degrees. So it would be useful to have a bit of clarity on that. I don't know whether.
The training I had was very good. Was it Firker that ran it? Yes, yeah, that's very good.
Okay.
But I can pick that, we can pick that up, Chair.
Okay. Any other questions then on paper on item A5?
Yes, please. Away from the figures, on between page 29 and page 30, the narrative report hops between the council election this May and yet the map is previous May, and yet when we go to the operational model, it talks about the time of writing, and when you read through Mark Bamford's report, he talks about the census coming through. So I don't know when this snapshot is, and it needs to be one or other. It needs to be as at the end of March, the last financial year, and then say it. Whereas instead, it's a little bit schizophrenic particularly on page 29. And then 78's already been picked up. On page 82, this is Councillor Lindsay's declaration. So I happen to be a trustee of Clever James, and I know David isn't. Councillor Lindsay isn't. But his wife was a part-time employee at Clever James till probably just after the mayoralty started. His wife has been a part-time employee for some years. So I actually wonder whether this also needs correction. I talked to him about this last night and he definitely agreed this was wrong, as a trustee. So whether you put a Emma James Centre and you do an asterisk and then say, under the related parties, that he has an interest. Personally, I don't get any remuneration. That's the difference. That's it. Thank you.
So we'll pick up that around Councillor David Lindsay. Just on the narrative report, always welcome feedback. I mean, it's a difficult decision. In theory, it should be looking back. It is about the previous accounts, but we are in such a changing environment. It's really hard to talk about the past without talking about the present and the future. But maybe we can frame it slightly differently in that it's got a backward-looking section and then a forward-looking section, so it's much clearer in terms of what period you're looking at. So yeah, really good feedback, and we'll take that back future years. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Just last question and we move on. Quick question on the bottom of page 6. £11 million set aside for COVID. I just wanted to get some feedback and update on that. How much was spent? What's the plan going forward?
Yeah, so we agreed as part of the budget in 20. I can't even get my years right now. We're always talking about 3 years at a time. In 2021-22, we agreed an 8 million. Essentially, the ring-fenced budget was to support COVID recovery, and we had our published COVID recovery programme at the time. It was going to be funded from reserve, so funded from the Special Projects Reserve. Within 21-22, we did only spend, I'm looking at Shahina, about just under 600,000. They're very small. There was up to 4 million committed, but only around 600,000 that was actually spent in the year. We've just taken a Q1 monitoring report for the current year up to leadership team that went in June. And what we got approval therefore is to expand the use of that fund. So it isn't just around COVID recovery, it's also around cost of living as well. And actually the two are different, but I think in terms of impact, the two are very much aligned. Yeah, so we've got that increased flexibility, so it does look beyond the COVID recovery programme now. So we'll continue to report on that in the leadership team reports that come every quarter, but just it was very low spend in the previous year, and I think we've reflected on that, but I do think there's going to be demanding cost of living prices that would enable that money to have a quite significant impact.
And if there's any money not used, that would go into the budget stabilisation.
We just won't draw it down from the special projects reserve. So that 8 million was going to be funded, 4 million from special projects and 4 million from public health. We only draw down from reserves when we actually spend the money. So we quite often commit to use of reserves, but we won't draw them down until we actually need them.
Keep that.
I had a question in the notes to the balance sheet on page 93 of the standard cap, where it discusses contingent liabilities. And I was just curious as to whether any stronger general wording would have been considered here in light of breach of agreement.
I think is that reflecting a general feeling that doesn't reflect as strong a position as we might see, particularly in light of events since March, July. Can we something slightly stronger? We understand the notion of contingency, we don't know what it is, we can't put a figure, we understand a bit about confidentiality, but that is, I think most members felt that is a bit weak, but bearing in mind the severity of the potential.
So I'll just go down to it, if that's all right.
Can I summarise that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
we
very
related
clear.
to the civil cases, to the
Yeah,
council's
yeah.
acceptance of failure of duty of care.
Just,
Thousands of people, including obviously the potential criminal charges coming up.
so just to be clear, what it says at the moment, it is therefore not possible to quantify any liability or estimate financial quantum is fair enough. But we know that the financial quantum is likely to be impacted by these points that Council just mentioned specifically. Therefore, when you connect the dots together, it might make sense to add even just a few words about how that could, that admission really could impact that financial cost.
That's something we can take away and look at, but what the position we have at the minute is we're able to quantify the quantum in terms of the total value of
Yes, of course.
claims. And actually, nobody has yet determined the apportionment of liability.
And we're not asking you to
No,
do
but
that.
that's where, I appreciate what you're saying. We're in a position where actually we are in a number of processes, and we put contingent liability because we don't know. So
Of
we
course
can't make a provision.
But unlike last year, when that breach of duty of care was not made versus now, when it is, one could draw the conclusion that there would be an impact on contingent liabilities.
Which is why there's a contingent liability statement in here, because we know.
Yes, but it's not very
Yes,
strong.
yeah.
We should acknowledge that there's been a change since
So
then.
we can take that away to have a look at.
I mean, we're only talking about a sentence or two, we're not asking you to substantially change it, but just to add to the severity of it in a way, is that?
I think it's a recognition that things have changed over the last year, and to acknowledge that in the accounts.
Take that away
If
to have a look
indeed
at.
things have changed.
Okay.
If things have changed within this financial year, not maybe into next year.
Okay, thank you very much for that, and thank you for your presentation. Can I then ask the committee if they agree to the Council and Pension Fund Statement of Accounts 2021-22 and Annual Government Statement for approval? Can I ask the committee if they agree them, please?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We now move on to item number 6, the External Auditor's Annual Report, and I'd like to invite Paul to present that, please.
Thank you very much. I will use the expanded pack, so I'll put the page numbers in the expanded pack. So my expanded pack starts on page 181.
Yeah.
So this report sets out in full the conclusions that we reached following the audit of the financial statements for the council. It doesn't present the money findings up in a later report that comes later in the year. This is the information that should be in front of members before you, so that you've had an opportunity to see this before approving the accounts. On page 183 of the expanded pack, we set out a page of writing the things that were in progress, nearing finalisation. Some of those, by their nature, can't be done until after the accounts have been finished. As Karen mentioned, the infrastructure statutory instrument is the main stumbling block that will prevent signing. The latest we've heard is that that piece of legislation will, once the wording of it is agreed, it's currently being consulted on, will come into effect from December the 25th. I can safely say we won't be signing the accounts on December 25th. So it'll be...
Why not?
It'll be sometime early in the new year that we'll be aiming to sign. It's worth waiting for because it otherwise prevents a huge amount of work that would otherwise be needed to analyse, and this affects every single company to analyse the infrastructure spend, which was, I think, unforeseen when infrastructure assets were added to the accounts back in 20 odd years ago. The other aspect of work we're waiting on, we have a final meeting with David and a number of auditors around the council to go through the up-to-date final aid disposition in terms of Grenfell, and then to reach a final decision or judgment on management's judgment as to whether or not any aspects of liability should be disclosed as a provision because they are quantifiable compared to the position that was there at the time the accounts were pulled together. And then the other little bits and bobs that we're finishing off, which should be done in the next week or so. And then it's a case of waiting for the statutory instrument, and we are proposing an unqualified opinion on the financial statements and an unqualified opinion on the pension fund financial statements. The accounts were of excellent quality, so there were no amendments to the primary statements, which is very rare given the complexity and size of the accounts, and so very good quality in terms of in them. Excellent relationships in terms of the back and forth, the rigorous project management, the iron grip that Lambda has over the whole process, which helps us stay on track to be where we are. And as Tyler mentioned, you're heading the pack really in terms of being in this position across the country as well as across London in terms of the being done to this extent, and all councils other than relatively small districts and group bodies are in the same position with infrastructure. The scale of it means everyone's going to have to wait until the statutory instrument. I will pick out some key parts of the report. You may recall in the previous meeting I shared the audit plan with you, which set out the work we were going to do against these significant risks. And this then sets out the work that we have done against those risks and whether it led to any findings. On page 186, we set out materiality for the audit. We set a materiality at the planning stage. We then determined whether that should be amended once we see the financial statements. For the main council financial accounts, we kept the same materiality. It was the final figures presented were very much in line with the figures that we'd been shared with us in terms of forecast outturn. So headline materiality of 3 million, the triviality figure of 565,000. So essentially any matter within the financial statements that we came across that was either corrected or not corrected, and I think all disclosures were corrected, above 565,000 is reported to you. So the fact this report isn't 300 pages long, when we're talking £750 million spend, it shows the extent to which the quality is there in terms of what was presented for audit. Pension fund, we did increase materiality, mainly because the net assets position was better than expected from the previous year in terms of the pension fund's performance. And indeed, in a few pension funds, we have an asset rather than a net liability, which again, a credit to the council's performance. We've set out the work against each individual risk. For the vast majority of them, the work that we did gave us the assurance that we needed to conclude that risk had not resulted in a material error in the financial statements. The ones where there are findings to report, page 189 in terms of land and buildings. Just to let you know, there were a few final queries we were waiting from the valuer, which is why we haven't fully concluded that there were no material risks. We're not expecting that what we get back is going to cause a problem. It's more a case of validating and verifying some of the assumptions that the valuer has made in the accounts because of the level of detail we're now required to go into in terms of drilling down into the valuer's valuations. But we're anticipating that will also be no issues to report. Nothing has come out of the work we've done so far in terms of the council's valuation or the valuations of the council's assets. Pension fund, net assets in the accounts. Again, the only bit we're waiting on, the LPFA, the London Pension Fund Authority, all the figures in some of the accounts. So we rely on assurance from the pension fund auditor of the LPFA in order to complete the assurance we need over the figures in the council statements. pension fund audit hasn't yet completed the work. It is a notoriously difficult audit, as you may imagine, given the nature of that organisation. But again, we're not anticipating that to be any problems. We've been in contact with the pension fund, and there are no issues that they've shared with us to date on the work that they've done, which suggests that this will be anything other than as it's required. We've touched on, so over the page 191, we've touched on the Grenfell provision, and indeed we will, if there's an update to come with that, we will share that with members following the meeting we have later in the month with the monitoring officer and officers and lawyers. The other work we did, which was a specific risk for this year, was the transfer of data from the obtained to the pension system. That work is now by and large completed, and there were no issues identified in terms of the transfer. So it all went through well, and the accuracy of the data in the new system, we're satisfied is materially accurate. The ground is crept in as the work was done to move from one system to another. The valuation of level 3 investments, this one resulted in a non-material difference, and it's largely a timing difference. The figures were prepared, I think, on December figures with an estimate of what they would be by the end of March, purely with the benefit of hindsight that a later audit process gives compared to the time when the accounts are prepared means we're able to see exactly what is the figure. There's a difference of about 4 million. It's not material, and we're not concerned that this is a difference which is arisen from anything other than markets hard to predict, especially level 3, which are literally hard to predict, hard to value investments. Over the page, in terms of infrastructure assets, the point you just raised, so we can't conclude on that yet until the statutory instrument comes. When it comes, we expect that to be able to say the override is applied, and therefore I think no further work needs to be done in terms of those figures. We then set out from page 194 onwards, for members' benefit, we summarise the key judgments that management has made in terms of the accounts, and then we summarise the work that we've done in our view of those assessments. Page 194, whilst we've put TBC on London buildings to be purely because of the final things we're waiting on, I expect that assessment to be Grant Thornton uses for some reason I cannot explain its own RAG rating system of purple to purple. But the equivalent of a proper RAG rating, I would expect when it comes in right to purple as Grant Thornton calls it. Similarly over the page, in terms of the other judgments, the judgments on the pension fund, all green and therefore light purple. Again, following that through, we were comfortable at the time in terms of the grants, income recognition and presentation, and in particular those grants which are the councils distribute and those accounts where the account are essentially passed through and therefore shouldn't feature in the council's expenditure, and the judgments there were sound and not the evidence that we corroborated those judgments with. The minimum revenue position, so page 199, we've reported this in previous years, there's again, because it's going from a unique position that the council is in which some of the housing it is using for social housing, in particular housing Grenfell survivors, was held by the general fund rather than the HRA. Ordinarily, the rule is that within the general fund, an MRP, minimum revenue provision charge, is applied to those assets. It hadn't been applied, but the council has agreed that from next year it will be applied for those assets that are left in the MRP. The only reason that last year's recommendation wasn't applied to this year was because the setting of the MRP is a statutory function done by the council, which had already been done for the year in question, because the start of the year happens before the audit takes place, and so it was too late. So there's no issue. The fact that it wasn't done for this year in question is purely it was done as soon as it could possibly be done.
Okay, I think I understand that. Do you understand? Right?
And when we say next year, we mean 22, 23,
yes.
as opposed to 23, 24. So it's in place. Yeah.
Well, we'll put it another way, the earliest year it could be done to take effect is 22, 23 from the date we raised it in our audit report.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you, Ms. Gregg. Going back to page 191, if we may, relating to the significant and the fire. I just wonder if we should explain a little bit more on there. The unknown unknowns, basically, about the potential financial risk of the 1,000 civil cases that we've accepted responsibility for, and the potential criminal charges. I think it would be helpful to have a little bit more of an explanation of
Just to,
just to actually name the known unknowns then.
Okay. So I think that the point which David is taking away in terms of whether note 32 will be updated,
Yeah.
we will, if there's an update to that note, then what we do each year with Grenfell, because of the significance of this, when we issue our audit opinion and we say it's unqualified, what we also do, and this is not a normal feature of opinions, is emphasis of matter and modification to the report. So in our audit opinion, anybody who, if all that anybody reads of anything to do with the accounts is the opinion we issue on the financial statements. In Kensington's opinion, it says it's unqualified, but then we emphasise the matter, we refer to the financial statements and what the council's done, and we refer to this particular matter as being of something to specifically draw it to the attention of any reader of the opinion, so that they're aware that despite an unqualified opinion, there is this large issue in the background. If the note in the council's, and in emphasising that matter, we can only emphasise what is in management's accounts, because if it's not in there, we can't emphasise by definition. So if there's an update made to note 32, then that will also feature in this report and also in the audit opinion that we issue as the statutory document over the financial statements.
Okay, so it's back to Mr. Hughes.
That was more emphasis on the comment on the discussion we had a few minutes ago to make sure that reflects where we are.
Thank you.
And then continues with sorry.
please finish, and then I'll raise one question.
Okay, so all I was going to say, it goes through the rest of the judgments that management has made in the accounts. There were no judgments where we have any particular significant concerns over the judgments which management has made in terms of pulling the accounts together. A lot of them are largely relatively dry judgments over valuations of pensions and other things which
It may be drawing to you, Paul, but they're very exciting as well. I'm going to pause you there and see if there's any questions. A few hands going up. Liz. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry, yeah.
So there was one point you've mentioned already. I just wanted to go back to on page 189.
Okay.
Expanded clause, and then have a separate. So on page 189, you mentioned that you're still waiting on some final controls, and it looks encouraging, but it's not going to be material. If it was the case that actually you got a last moment surprise, how might that, if at all, impact the points that you just?
Okay. So let's put an example forward. Let's say we're seeking some final documentation from the valuer to back up one of his assumptions which influence the values of the account. If the valuer, in providing information, either he identifies or we identify that actually it was based on a factually incorrect fact, and therefore the assumption is wrong, and let's say it changed the value of your assets by 100 million, which actually in the context of the assets isn't a lot given the size, but is material for the financial statements, then the conversation we have with management would be, actually, we think the accounts are materially wrong, and we would give management the opportunity to amend them. If there was material amendments, then it would come back via the chair, just to reconfirm that the approval is still in place. So even with the accounts approval today, should anything come back, it wouldn't mean that they can't be changed and amended in line with the usual governance strategies.
Great, thank you. I have a second question, and I'm not certain where you are in the flow of your narrative.
That's fine.
But my second question is with regard to the recommendations you made on page 210.
Could we just pause that and just take any questions on the risks and then.
No worries at all.
Did anybody?
Yeah,
Liz?
on the I think it's the risks. Yeah, page 193. We had set procedures looking at infrastructure assets, but we kept those infrastructure assets to the fixed asset register. How do we know that those infrastructure assets actually exist?
That's a very good question. And so essentially, and again, the council is not out of step with many councils in this respect. Capital expenditure, and by and large, we're talking about road maintenance and that sort of spend is capitalised and put in as an infrastructure asset, isn't necessarily kept in the same way as other assets. And so, in the sense that in land and buildings, you can point it down, point to the building, say there it is. we know there are roads in Kensington, let's say, but it's not broken down into, well, you know, it's the A3, I'm going to get my words right, it's the A320 or it's the A5 or etc. etc. What we do know though, each year, as we're auditing this, we audit whether the figure that's in terms of the addition to the infrastructure assets, which is there each year, does it, we test each year whether additions are genuine capital additions. So is it that there's a new property that's been purchased? Is it that this relates to £50,000 that was spent updating a road within the borough? So we have assurance each year that the additions, which then get added to the forward balance each year, are audited and do relate to maintenance spend on the infrastructure in the borough. And so it's a combination of the roll forward assurance we've got from all the previous years of audit, plus the auditing we do this year of any additions to the infrastructure assets. The statutory instrument risk is that when, for example, a road which is retarmacked, that expenditure goes in. The question which the FSC are raising is, should any residual expenditure be written off because it wasn't fully depreciated? And no council pretty much is able to contribute to that because the records are simply not kept in that way.
And another thing, on what was it, page 196, it says that we should have an actuarial evaluation. It's required every 3 years. The last one was March 2019, so we should have had one March 2022, 6 months ago.
It's in process. It won't be published until December time.
So just to confirm, it's to the March 22. We don't start the process beforehand, but the rates will come into play for the next accounts. So we're all on track. We haven't delayed anything. We're not running out of time. We're doing it all according to all LGPs are going through this at the moment. So we'll have the new rates for the next year's accounts. This current year.
Okay, do you want to carry on then from where we left off?
So in terms of those key judgments, I think there's nothing more to say in terms of but I have to go back into any questions of detail in terms of either management's approach or our view of management's approach. Page 202 of the expanded pack then sets out other communication requirements with you. There's nothing by exception to share with you other than the letter of representation will have a Grenfell representation from management in it, which therefore differs from otherwise from the norm. But all of the third-party confirmations that we've tested independently of the council to corroborate figures in the council's accounts were received, and there were no particular difficulties that we encountered with the council in obtaining the information we needed to support figures in the accounts and the independent evidence that corroborates figures that management is reporting. Over the page, the going concern is now, it used to be we needed to treat going concern in the same way as in a commercial entity. Practice Note 10, which is a guidance document that now applies to all public sector bodies, says that significantly greater reliance can be placed on the assumption that even if the council were in financial difficulties, the services would continue, and on that basis it's appropriate to prepare the accounts on a going concern basis, because you will suddenly lose housing services or environmental services. So on that basis, going concern is appropriate, and we're satisfied with management's judgment. We can rely on Practice Note 10. Any wider commentary in terms of financial viability and planning will be in the BFM report that comes later in the year. But for the financial statements purposes, that's what we need to do there. We then set out through the report, and I won't go through this in detail, page 207 and 8 sets out in terms of the ethics, no ethical threat that we have identified in terms of either relationships that we have with a firm has with council and vice versa. And there's no additional work we do other than the certification arrangements for the claims, which all require independent certification, but are all related to figures which already sit in the accounts. And then the appendices set out a variety of different elements. The action plan, we've agreed with management all of the issues. I don't think there's anything particularly significant that it's worth highlighting, but again, I'm happy to come back to those if you think.
Do any members have any questions on the action plan?
I do.
John, you only.
Thank you. The membership system on 210, sorry, yes, 210. Surely this whole lack of the security permissions and the double authorisation is an issue that every auditor is going to come up because Hampshire partners must have lots of councils. And you kind of go, can we not press on them or indeed work with the other councils to say, could you put in this two-step authorisation? Because if this is going to keep coming up time and time again, of course this is carried forward, it's not helping you and it's not helping the auditors. Surely that puts the process at risk, so why can't they change it? Or why can't we put pressure on them to change it?
It's actually, because it's an 8-partner partnership with shared services, we're very reliant on how they configured the system. We joined after several partners, we were 3 London boroughs were the latest to join. And the way that the system has been configured, they operate a high trust model. And as part of that basic configuration, which is incredibly difficult to change, they don't have a two-step authorisation process for journalists. I would say I think we managed to evidence and give enough assurance to the auditors, because one of the things that we've done this year in particular is actually evidence that no senior manager posted any journals at all in the system, done reports to give them that assurance. And it's something we monitor throughout the year as well. So I think hopefully you've got enough assurance.
It just seems like it's adding awful lot of layers onto you, whereas actually it must surely be an issue for all their accounts as well. Or intriguingly, if their accountants aren't picking it up. Then I also had a second question, which was on the related party disclosures. I didn't know whether it was something that could be put in employee contracts with regards to related party transaction disclosure. But clearly that doesn't help you with members.
Yeah, as I say, we're always looking for ways to improve that response, but yeah, we take that away and discuss that with HR. Just on the first one regarding IBC, I mean, maybe one question that we can take away is, so it'll be interesting to see which other auditors they have together. So I know Grant Thornton are auditors also for at least one other partner that's part of that. Is it two? So yeah, Grant Thornton. So I imagine a similar recommendation will come up, but it'll be maybe we can pose that question to the other 5 partners who clearly have different ones, just to see if they're getting a similar recommendation coming through. I can't say it necessarily change, and like everyone says, we do put additional ways in to get that assurance, but something we could take away.
I think it's also worth adding that this is so levels are quite correct. So some of the compensating controls in place are you know they perform the function that they're required to perform. This is one of those issues. We're reporting the risk, but equally, all of these, there is also a cost to all of these things, and there's a cost-benefit analysis which the council will sort of perform for itself in terms of is the additional assurance gained over this risk worth the cost it would take, not least because being part of a multi-party arrangement would mean that's quite a small thing to make such changes, and which ultimately is a matter of policy for management and the council. If you were to ask me, taking into consideration the compensating controls, how big a deal of this is this, I'd say there's certainly no evidence that the lack of authorisation, for example, has resulted in any particular problems in the way that system's working. Equally, if the next question is, well, if there's no issues that are arising from it, why do you recommend it? Which would be a very good question. It is essentially because it is we have to raise it so that we can document management's dealing with the risk, rather than not raise it at all, and then members wouldn't know that this discussion would happen and wouldn't necessarily have the same insight or transparency of the risk we've raised and management's response to it. But the fact it's not, whilst we have to equally then go through the report and say recommendation it's not one that would concern me, because the compensating controls in place so far have not been proven to be adequate.
Okay. Any other points? Then moving on to the follow-up. Any questions?
So I have 2 questions. One of them is on page 211, we explained it. and this is a question from management where it says we will introduce a new procedure to write off credits, etc. When?
It's in the current financial year. It is, this actually is, it's a sensitive area for us because we need to make sure that we have made every possible effort to locate the people who these credits are due back to. So it's almost a last resort for us to be writing this off because we want to have taken every step to locate the people that owe this money. And so that's the process, and so that's why we're also looking at anything that's more than 6 years created date. It's a bit of a difficult area because the way that the reporting works, it could have suddenly appeared as an item that relates to 5 years ago, for example, but it's only suddenly appeared because it's the date created on the system is different, it's more recent date. So it's a never moving target in terms of the reported what is within the 6 years and so on. So a lot of work has been done on it to locate these balances and people that they belong to. And it is definitely being worked on in the current financial year.
I always think, and they're going to be fairly small sums, but I think small sums are really important as well. So it's almost a one last chance at trying to track down who these monies go to, what we do before we do do those write-off credits, we can refer to them. What I would say is, even if we do, so if a resident, so just to give some assurance, if a resident did come back and it was 8, 9, 10 years ago, that doesn't preclude access to that refund that they're entitled to. We just wouldn't be holding it as a balance on that. We'd fund it from another form of a reserve or a contingency. It doesn't take away.
Understood.
Yeah.
Anyone can come back at a future date, that's fair enough. But the reason why I was asking will then lead to my second question, which is completely appreciating the sensitivity of the matter. These things need a due date and completion, which leads on to the second question on page 213, which is why are these two other items outstanding in the previous year? I'd like to understand what prevented resolution of last year's recommendations in this calendar year.
So in terms of, so the first one is relating to the new journal one, and that's the one where management is able to control.
Okay.
The second one is we could see, because last year there were a fewer number of members who didn't put in their related party disclosure, so we recommended that they should. Then clearly this year there were significantly more people putting in their related party disclosure.
In the wrong direction.
Yeah, and albeit there's an explanation in terms of both the election and the officers that didn't have left the council. So they're considered as not implemented because the journals one I think will be the case. Yes, related parties.
Circumstances beyond anyone's control.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of the timescales on the collection fund recommendation, what we don't want to be doing is seeing as a recommendation in next year's.
Exactly.
So I think that's, the answer is as soon as possible, but absolutely we would say that we would be.
Thank you.
There's only 50 members, aren't there? There's staff as well, a handful of staff as well.
Any help you can give?
And later on that one, I don't know if they have. Can we, any other questions now? Because I'm keen that we're slightly. Okay, we've now we've considered the report, we've commented on it, you've got some actually to take away, just to reflect on, and finally, really to thank all the staff of this council for incredible hard work putting all this together. It is a mammoth task, and we appreciate the diligence with which you've done it and the skill with which you've done it, which has been reinforced by all virtual in terms of how they found you to work with. So thank you very much to all of you. Thank you to you for being with us tonight. Thank you.
Can I just ask one question about fees? So the proposed fee, what did the proposed fee cover and what was why is there a question mark in the final? Particularly all the way down to page 320?
Yep, so in terms of the fees, the proposed fee is set out in the plan in terms of what we anticipate in the future cost. The only reason there's a TBC in the final fee is because until we sign the opinion we can't confirm the fee. However, in this report, there is, so in some organisations, the report is full of things, either where the accounts were wrong, or there were issues, or the evidence didn't support what was there, and you can draw an inference from that, that therefore that final fee is going to be different from the proposed fee. This report is full of things like that. So in the absence of anything, so for example, if the valuer comes back and everything's validated, we've done the work we anticipated doing. If he did come back and it turned out that all his figures were wrong, then there'll be additional work which we'd have to reflect into that.
So the value for money isn't additional to this, it's included.
It's included within that, yes.
Okay, thank you. Can I move now to item number 7, the audit update? Work. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you. This is for information. Someone join me here. Paper A7.
So this is our regular update report on what's done with the plan for this year. There's not a huge amount in it yet because it's still quite early days and it really only goes up to the end of August. It's just the timing. But in that time we were seeing that there were actually 3 audits finalised. So that's when the report is completely finished and agreed by the management. Unfortunately, 2 of them were limited. We can talk about this in a second. Another one was satisfactory, which is a positive one, which was a different area we haven't looked at before, which is actually how the resident engagement programme was working on the capital side in the housing department. So that was pleasing to get a satisfactory assurance. Just to sort of highlight, I don't know, because new members and other changes, we've just put in here on 3.3 what our assurance levels are, which I thought might be quite useful, and that would pop up in future reports as well, just to keep refreshing the full year. So 4 levels of assurance, the top being substantial, and the lowest would be nil. We very rarely give nil assurance because we've never been in that position. But limited assurance means there are a number of things that need to be put right, potentially in high priority areas, which is why those 2 audits there are limited. So also need to put it into context really. When we're doing our audits, you're looking at different types of risk as well. So a school generally is a bit lower risk than say a major system because it's fairly well controlled, smaller values potentially. So the reason that was going to be limited insurance would be because there are a number of areas which are important to get right. That's why that's come out as a limited insurance. But it might not compare quite the same as the other model, which is limited insurance, which is children's placement. So we do take into account the context of what we're looking at when we give those opinions. On the children's services placements audit, so this it's been quite a complex area because they've been using 2 different systems to manage the placement service for the borough. It was a tribunal focus as well. Hannah Smith left probably 18 months ago, roughly, which was quite complex topic, and they also lost quite a few staff when Hammersmith took it back. So obviously their staff went back to Hammersmith. So there were quite a lot of challenges going on there. It's now a by-borough service, but even that, Westminster currently use a different system. Yeah, so the staff have quite a few challenges there. But one thing that has been going forward is that they have recognised that they need to improve the process. They had a database they were using, which was great, it was written 20 years ago, but it needed to be upgraded. And what they're doing jointly, the 2 councils, is moving towards a much better and more robust system, which they both use, which is Mosaic. So a lot of the issues that we've identified in here, they were well aware of, and that they were working towards addressing. And the issue should all be addressed by the time of implementation, which is next April. So just to sort of flag up with these. When they invited us in, they knew it wasn't going to be perfect. So to give them some credit for that, and really confirming that was the case. So just wanted to come to that.
You said when they invited you in,
Well, we already had some work planned there, and that they knew there were problems because of the different systems that were being used. I mean, I'm not saying for minute, but it wasn't as bad as some of the problems that one of the other councils was having. So, we looked at this. We have looked at this for all three in different ways. Because of the disaggregation, it's quite important to understand where we are now, not where we were 2 years, 3 years ago. So they welcomed us to come in, but they knew it was not going to be the best feature. They've been totally engaged with us and proactive to move it forward. And we are sort of working alongside them as they move the project forward to bring in new systems. So they are including us.
So we're helping them to sort of make sure they build the right controls into the new system and processes going forward as well.
Okay, thank you.
Shall I just quickly summarise, if that's okay? So I wasn't going to dwell on the satisfactory assurance audit, we've got taking questions on that. And then we've got our summary of the follow-ups that we've done in a particular period, all of which were very good implementation recommendation, which is one housing benefits that hasn't been implemented yet. And as you know, we've been picking those up on the table. So hopefully that's useful for you. Appendix 1 is just summarising where we are today. So in the year to date, we've completed 4 pieces of work. But there's 3, but there are a number of pieces of advisory work, which, whilst they're not assurance pieces, they're quite useful to see where we are in a particular area with the view that we'll be going back in there either this year or next year to see how they've adopted the recommendations that we've made. So they build a picture.
And those will get reports on.
Yeah, and we follow up on all things, even if it's advisory.
I'm just going to pause you there, just if there's any questions so far. John, did you have a question?
I just have one question. Page 244, the last bullet point. You have this question about whether end dates will be properly recorded. My question was, did the payment cease even if the end date wasn't recorded?
So, as it happens, because they were running 2 systems which aren't integrated, 3 actually complete payment system, there weren't overpayments because there was a lot of manual intervention, which wasn't very productive. With one of the other councils, because they were integrated, there were overpayments because they weren't picking up the right date from the right system. So, yeah, and it's the consistency. You need to have the right information in the right places. And when you have the new system, everything will be in one system.
Liz? You, okay.
Yes, I wanted to ask about resident engagement, especially on the capital programme. This is absolutely the bane of our lives and we're getting into. I'm amazed to see that that's got satisfactory assurance. But then on reading it, I see that there are lots of qualifications. So there may be just a few residents very involved, and maybe it's too much for some people to get quite so involved. And then the areas for improvement, they have their own key performance indicators, and there's no kind of information there. I'd be really interested to know, just as one example, and I don't need the stats on this. For example, Swinbrook Estate in Goulburn, where I was councillor over now, and I think there's 700 households there, up in arms about the capital programme, leaseholders getting perfectly good wooden hardwood windows ripped out and replaced with UPVC, and they're going to be charged for them. This has been going on and on and on. It's been absolute hell. I handed it over to council Larry, poor thing, but I'm just amazed that this has got satisfactory assurance. I've heard from them, I've heard from residents in Lankwest. It's not only leaseholders, also tenants. I know that good resident engagement is hard, I do know that, But I'm amazed that it's got satisfactory assurance, I really am. If there are 3 people saying, oh, this has been really great, you're listening to us, there's no figures in there, and we don't know what actually.
No, I mean, I'd need to go back, I would have sampled certain projects as well, but we were trying to get a big picture here, where some things are good, but there are, as you say, those things that could be done
Huge
better.
problems with some of them, absolutely massive. So I'm really amazed to see that there's anything like, and people will always complain about engagement, I know that,
Yeah.
but we've had some very, very, very specific cases very recently. So
Is there anything
I'm
more
really
you'd like
mystified.
to see?
Where would that have been reported? Has it been reported? It's been reported to housing communities. Then I'd like the background figures. Oh, we do sometimes engage. Sorry to interrupt you. For example, on the budget, I was told, oh, it's really good. We've had double the number of people commenting on the budget this year. That was last year. And so how many was that? 12. And it was 6 the year before. Given that I went to one, this is the housing association, I went to one, I had a meeting with one housing association, and they said, oh, it's really good, you know, we got, we had a consultation day, whole day of consultation, we've had no negative comments at all. And I happen to know that nobody went, not a single person went to the consultation. And I said, oh, okay, so were there any positive comments? I knew there weren't because nobody had gone, not one person the whole day. So I'm really, really wary
So,
about
so
that.
we
to
can
get
take,
the picture.
we can take an action where change it.
It would just be nice to know, I just, that doesn't ring true to me, I'm afraid, sorry.
Oh, no, I understand, and I said there are some things in there which you recognise, which is the engagement is
I know it's difficult, I know it's difficult, but we have to be frank about it.
But at least if we know it's only 6 people, then we can put it into context. There
Yeah,
might
absolutely.
be satisfactory, might still be
How many,
satisfactory.
you know,
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
okay.
So briefly, you mentioned in your discussion about Appendix 2. So naturally, I want to bring up the fact that there are other points here that where it says that there was meant to be a revised implementation date 6 months ago, and the review is still in progress as
Right.
of August. So given that it's now October, where are we?
Right, so when we do the first follow-up, when something's not implemented, there could be a very good reason for that, and we would agree a new implementation date. We won't necessarily rush back on day one, because for a start, if the implementation date is March 2022, we need some data to check to see that it's actually been done. So if they don't start it until March 2022, there's no point going in April, we might get months later. So it really depends on what it is and what we need to check to see whether they've done it. Now, for example, if you take the first one, which is West to West repair service, that has now been done. It's quite complicated to do that follow-up because there are lots of different recommendations.
But may I just pause you?
Yeah.
If it's complete, then why isn't it listed?
Because I literally cleared it this morning.
I see.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
There was a big drive in during the summer to catch up on some of these, and it wasn't an easy one because there was so many recommendations.
Understood.
And so I can tell you that there are only 2 recommendations which are now partially complete, but they're only partially complete because we've made some additional recommendations. So we could add to the complication there. But by next time, they will be.
It's wonderful to see both the transparency and the
Yes. So yeah, that literally went out.
And it may be helpful.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it may be helpful on reflection if we put, if we, when the follow-up work started, we'll say review in progress perhaps,
Indeed.
just to give you
Yes.
education and reassurance that it's
Yeah,
not
well,
going to be dragged.
Yes,
I've got an
exactly.
update for financial assessment as well to know where we
Thank
can
you.
do that before March
And that
2023.
gets me to this view. I looked at that and there seems a lot there, but I don't know whether that is a lot. In context
They're
of the
quite
council,
specific.
yeah.
They're very specific.
But I think overall, given the number of pieces of audit work we do each year, I think the recommendations we got is.
Yeah.
But again, when you have them on a list and you see their progress, that helps you get that.
Yeah, so I've got a quick question about sort of the strategic design that we've done in audit, and this is about silos within different departments.
Yeah.
Within relation to sort of IT, computer infrastructure, if I take you to page 254, for example, housing and social investment, collaboration regarding the design and rollout of the CRM system. Do we have a centralised role whereby either IT or internal audit is looking to streamline IT systems across the council so that you don't have a 20-year-old legacy system with a whole load of manual inputs, taking time and money and having things slipping through the cracks? Now, do we actually have that sort of helicopter view, and is that internal audit's role, making sure that we aren't losing some of the expertise from one particular business area that should be put in another business area? Whose role is it?
So the primary is their respite with IT, so they do carry out reviews to look at where they can streamline and rationalise the systems that are in place. So they're currently working on the digital strategy, which will be coming forward to leadership team later this year. As an example, we work with them on our audit programme to see how they are delivering the IT strategy, part of which is about how they look at rationalisation of the estate and systems. We also have a role, but we're sort of a step removed from management, where we see opportunities for rationalisation of systems, and we've done a piece of work which is currently being cleared with management, where we've seen 2 or 3 different systems in use, where we think actually having one system in use across the piece will be much better, and that's something management are looking to adopt. So we will take that on the basis of when we do a piece of audit work in a particular area, we'll pick the IT is the prime role for doing that across the estate.
So would it be possible then to ask IT to do a presentation, maybe not in one to council, so we can get an overview of that strategy piece?
Yeah.
Because I'd be quite keen to understand what they're looking at, where the gaps are, to make sure there's joined up writing across the whole council.
Absolutely happy to take that away. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, then I'd like to close that item. We've looked at it, we're considering commenting on the report, and I'd like to now move on to item number 8, which is the assurance mapping for Grenfell expenditure. I appreciate this has been before this committee in various times, a few times, so some of us are coming to this new, some of you have been involved before. So David, do you want to update us on that, please?
Thank you, Chair, and apologies this is coming later than we had hoped, but just to give some background to the new members of the committee, we had a number of reports back in 2021 which Taryn and I brought to the committee in terms of working through the expenditure on Grenfell from 2017 onwards, looking at how that, in terms of the detailed breakdown of how that money was spent. Also, we had colleagues from the Grenfell Dedicated Service here to talk to us about the way in which the service was being delivered, and we had a joint meeting with Overgreen Scrutiny back last November, where we were trying to look at the impact assessment and the finances in the round. There are obviously some concerns around how do we make sure, notwithstanding external audits review of the accounts and get unqualified opinions on the accounts, how do we give you as a committee assurance that all of the expenditure being reported to you in those reports was correct, and that what you were being told was complete and accurate. So we went through a process with the independent members of the committee to try and work out how we might do that piece of work. We had some conversations with some of the big audit firms. We came to the view, with the help of the independent members, that actually internal audit was better placed to be able to carry out that work, partly given the cost that was being suggested by firms, but also our understanding of the systems and processes within the council. So we agreed then we'd undertake an assurance mapping piece of work, and we do that in 2 phases. So the first phase, which we're reporting to you on the progress today, is very much looking at how taking that working paper that Taryn provided you back in May 21, which set out the 4 years worth of expenditure on income, revenue and capital on Grenfell through the 4-year period, what sources of assurance we had over and above the external auditor's work. So recognising the external auditor carries out its testing on a sample basis, they won't have checked everything. So there's part of that is how do we give additional assurance over and above what they've given, that actually you can be reassured about the work that the money has been spent in the areas that it's been identified to be spent on. So we started off from Taryn, so that that 1-page 4-year summary. We also looked to the working papers behind that, which gave more detail in terms of breakdown of the figures in each of those boxes. compared that to the audited accounts, so we're satisfied now that all those things stack up. We then talk to officers, and I've been looking at documents to understand to what extent can we find other sources of assurance over and above the external auditors who work on the accounts. And that's what we've set out in terms of paragraph 4.4. We've looked at each of those properties on that 4-year line by line income expenditure table to work out what other sources of assurance could we see which would either completely cover a particular box on that report, and which could partially do it, and which were only being given assurance by external audit. So looking at the chart on 5.1, what we've found in summary is that actually a lot of the expenditure it's on page 260, sorry, a lot of the expenditure that we've been reviewing is covered by other sources of assurance over and above what external audits have done. So we're talking about central government and the audit of the grant funding, Section 31 grant funding that's been given to the authority. We're talking about the GLA and the funding they gave to purchase new properties. And we're talking about the sources of assurance as well. So actually, a good proportion of that expenditure on the map has been covered by other parties as well as the external auditor. We're now getting into burrowing into the detail of what that assurance looks like in detail to say actually is that sufficient robust assurance on the figure or part of the figure, which part of the figure in each of those boxes.
And also, what are the...
coming back in November with that update, because that's the bit, we're working on Terry's team have been fabulous as well in terms of providing access to all the information we need, but I wanted to give you a picture of how, first of all, a lot of this expenditure is covered by other sources of assurance over and above the external auditor, which is good.
Yeah.
Actually, when you look at the chart on 5.2, that's really the case, very much so for the first 2 years, less so for the years 3 and 4. But again, thinking about the activity and what's happening and how the authority has been directed to do certain things, actually, it's good to see that other sources of assurance over the external auditor in those first 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, in Appendix 1, what we've done is, albeit it's not on 1 page, it's on 2 pages, is to take the 4 years and align to Taryn providing the report back in May 21, just to show you in sort of graphical form each of the areas where we which types of assurance, which categories of assurance we're able to place on those areas. But we're now, in each of those areas, working down, particularly where it's a partial coverage, we've got, we now understand what that partial coverage looks like, the source document that gives the assurance, to then be able to come back next time and say, these are the gaps where we'll do some more testing, or potentially have done some more testing when we come back next time, where the only coverage is the external assurance on the accounts. Given that's an unqualified opinion, we know it's not looking at all the transactions that sit in those areas.
Yeah.
So hopefully that, in terms of, and that's where we're up to. So we intend to come back in November with the next progress report that hopefully will show you we've got the sources of assurance, what they are, how robust they are, and we'll either have done some testing, we say these are the areas we're going to test, which was the phase 2 piece of work we talked about.
And if those other audits raised any issues, would we see those?
So we would summarise those for you, so you could actually. So I'm really keen that the key piece of this is the assurance we've had from elsewhere robust enough to be able to assure you that this is doing the job. It's over and above the external auditor.
Yeah.
It's doing the job we believe it should be doing.
But even in the external modeling, what does it mean that it was within their scope? What did they actually really test?
Yes. Yeah.
So we're just interested in the views of the 3 externals, because you were involved in setting this up.
Yeah.
Is it doing what you had hoped, and is it got to the stage
Not
and
yet.
to progress what you hoped it would get
It's
to?
getting quite way ahead.
Let me finish it up to now.
Yeah. I think where it is now is fine. I do have concerns about the extent to which, particularly in the latter years, that we're relying on the external audit, because it's not going to be material for them. They're not necessarily going to.
And they'll lower, in terms of the totals of expense, they're lower than in the first 2 years. But that's where, again, I think we will be focusing all of our samples testing on to really give you that assurance over and above what there is already.
And also these categories, you know, it'd be quite nice to know when you say external sources, what those sources are.
So next time, so yes, apologies, so next time we will break that down for you by each. But we're trying to just think of a way of doing it so that it's not a massive one effectively. But we're happy to do it box by box. Here's box one, this is box two. So we'll come up with a way that is going to be easily understandable, but easily communicated. I'm sure you'll understand it, but it's just easily communicated in a way that helps you to get that clarity on the picture.
So, Chairman, just a question to you, David. Have you found any issues so far?
No, I meant to say as well, no issues. So we're happy we've tied back the figures from Taryn's May 21 table to the working papers that support it that feed back to the audited accounts. So we're happy with all of that. We are happy so far in terms of what we've seen, in terms of talking to officers, and the documentation we've seen that there are no issues arising so far, but we are working through that documentation.
And so, are you asking, do you do the auditor, you ask a question, you get a response, and then you say show me?
Yes. So it is a test and check and challenge. It's not just, here's a piece of paper, that's great. It's looking to make sure and actually testing and checking what it is that, again, it's what it says it is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry. And you know, I think this is very good, and it is work in progress, I recognise. But I did have trouble tying the schedules together. I couldn't see where the 7593 went, the corporate services. It's complicated.
Trust me.
Yes, it's just making sure it all ties together and it can be easily sort of, because it took me ages to work out. Oh, there's the 406 million.
Yes, it took us a while.
And I think it's this, with this, what this is, it's important to us, but it's also important to our residents that they are assured that this, and it's relatively easy to follow.
Yeah.
I don't wonder whether actually.
Hang on,
Landscape
Can we
would work.
Go with Emma, please.
I don't know how we would have published that one. We would have to do it that way.
We'll figure it out together.
Emma, do you want to?
Thank you. Yes, I can see we're getting there, and that's really helpful. And I can see that we're getting better at counting our money. And the other thing is that about money, we need to know how good we have been at spending it and where it's gone. So I'd be very grateful. The questions I get asked are no names, obviously, about salaries. How much was on salaries, and where is that? Is that corporate service? I just don't know. People say, oh, they're all earning lots of money and drinking tea and biscuits all day. So which I don't believe. But one of them is a kind of breakdown of salaries and how many people, and I know there was a massive turnover of people at various times. That's one thing I get asked. The other one is media and communications, not just engagement with the people who needed it, but press, media, basically. And what, you know, there's more of a breakdown on services. So there is a fair bit here, but you know the curve. So how much was spent on salaries there, and how much on services? Just a simple breakdowns there. Because they'll say, oh, that's quite a lot of money. That was all spent on senior management. This is what I get asked for. So that kind of breakdown would be really helpful. And I can just say this is what they spent on salaries over those years, and all the rest went on services. It's just that little bit of breakdown. And I think just to say housing. Maybe just a little bit more detail to say, you know, housing in temporary accommodation.
What each of those categories.
Thank you, Chairman. The point you're starting to raise is this exercise going to give us assurance that the spend was effective?
Yeah, it's different.
I think.
Yeah.
So ask the question again to you, David.
Yeah.
Are there any issues? Are you considering, will you consider whether the spend was effective? Because I know when we defined what you were doing, that was
the important thing.
Yes. Yeah.
We know what's been spent, but
How much of that is covered in the individual select committees?
That's the whole problem, Chair. That's exactly why we need to do this here. That's the whole problem. Why we need it all in one place. Because we lost our committee, our dedicated committee, and it's been spread out all over the place. So we can't see it all in one place.
That's a separate issue. Where they should be scrutinised now, you're saying they're not being scrutinised in those committees. So I'm slightly concerned.
Sorry,
It's
may
not
I
put to-
clarify?
Yeah.
What we found when this work was presented, which is what directly led to this exercise, is that it was fragmented. So it's not that committees aren't scrutinizing certain things. It would appear they are. The issue is that there's no unified view of the whole thing anymore, because this committee that used to exist went away and now there's no unified view. And the light bulb went on for us when we had this joint session and we realized, there was another whole world out there that we couldn't see. And that was what directly led, us as the co-optees to suggest this exercise, because it's the only way you can see the unified view.
Yes. I think the other thing which that joint meeting was really helpful for, which I will pick up with colleagues after the meeting, is that there was an agreement that going forward, the impact assessment reporting of the service and the finances were reported at the same time and that to each other. So that's something that was a commitment made, if you remember back then, annually. And we'll pick up with colleagues to make sure that's in hand. And I think that's something that, from memory, that will be going to the scrutiny committee, because it's great in terms of performance elements. There's no reason why that information can't come to the committee either as well.
But you've scooted away from whether you're going to give us a report about effectiveness.
So we will see where we can do that, yes. So obviously the committee are aware there are factors certainly in the early days about how council's being directed to do certain things, and we can sort of draw that out.
And also the impact assessment will be written by us, so we're back to marking our own homework, aren't we? Because everything else is being assured and double checked and triple checked. But the impact assessment will be us saying we did an absolutely amazing job, not a penny was spent.
We have a new chief executive starting at the end of October. So what I'm keen to do is make sure that we bring to the committee a risk strategy, a refreshed risk register, reflects what the requirements of the new chief executive coming in, but also you as a committee. So what I'm proposing, so we've kept the risk register as is for this cycle. I've tried to draw out, clearly the key issue which runs through all of this, which EMT discussed a few weeks back, is inflation and the economic situation. That is something that's running rampant through the risk register in a way, and hopefully you can see that in terms of some of the changes, not least in splitting out the risks around the risk to the local economy and to residents, and also the risks to the local economy and the council and to residents being separate risks in the register. So I think it's important to recognise that we want to continue to develop this. And to you, having had those conversations with chief executive, with yourselves about what we think the risk register and risk strategy should look like going forward, include a heat map. In the document, again, to sort of visualise the risk register, because I think again, it helps to see where are the key risks in relation to each other, and with the ones in bold type and larger are the ones that have moved. So again, you're seeing some movement there, but reflecting and recognising that the kind of requests the committee have made previously about.
Do have time to deep dive.
Yes.
If we look at tonight's meeting, okay, we've had the audit.
Yes.
But I would have thought we need to make sure that we have a suitable agenda. Gives us time to deep dive. I don't see 15 minutes, 20 minutes of deep dive. I don't know what.
Agreed.
Or else it's a pointless exercise.
So what I'd suggest is actually we do those, rather than bringing the register again, we do the two deep dives, if that's okay. What we can do is make sure you get sight of those as early as possible. So if there are questions in advance you want to raise, we can do that.
My suggestion would be you circulate the register anyway.
Yes, happy to do it. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Even if we don't need
necessarily
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Could I ask that, I found it really helpful when you put the previous ranking alongside in brackets.
Yeah, that was one of my points in the last meeting that I think.
So just to build on that, then the box at the top right, the risk scores. Just some of them, for example, if we look at page 276, where we're talking about landlord health and safety. And this is one of the smaller gaps actually. It's currently 15, it should be 12. Now there are lots of actions there, but it just says ongoing. What?
So it's better than.
If I'm reading that, it's quite a serious issue because we are way above where we want to be. Yet we're not. Doesn't appear that we've gripped it. And there's several like that.
Yeah.
Ongoing doesn't.
So we'll
Something
take that away again in offices, because I appreciate that, because there are some things which will be, many more things where we should be able to get this up.
Well, if it's ongoing, again, that is it going forwards or backwards in the ongoing? Councillor Yankson, you've got a question.
Yeah, just like, so I remember asking a question about fire safety on buildings. And I think I said that if we're trying to do something to be the best borough, we should be doing something on fire safety. How many buildings do we have to check? How many buildings do we check in a day? How many have we got left to go? I remember asking that specifically on this risk register last time. I haven't seen no update to those figures.
I'll pick up on that from you.
Because
Yeah,
clearly,
They've done that in housing communities, so that's what it's been done.
fire safety, if we're not doing something on fire safety, we're not doing anything.
Well, there's the new bill, isn't it, that comes in January.
Even if it's the new bill, we've got to be doing something on fire safety and making it very transparent.
So I'm happy to, as Councillor Jenko said, there is information that goes to scrutiny, but also I'm aware, and I sit on a board that is chaired by Dan Hawthorne as the Executive Director for Housing and Social Investment that meets every 2 months, so it looks at corporate assurance on building safety. So we have a standing item of that meeting every time, which is housing statutory safety. So I'm happy again to look at the information we can share with the committee. And the assurance I take from those meetings is actually it's continuing improvement, particularly around fire safety. But take your point about making sure we can provide information directly to you.
Yeah, again, I never continue improvement. I never know what that against what's the benchmark for that.
Sorry, I apologise. I've got loose language on my part. So they're actually hitting very high levels of gas safety.
There's something behind it.
So in terms of gas safety, for example, you're talking at literally a handful of instances where access can't be gained to properties to carry out gas safety inspections, as an example. Yeah.
And just, I don't want to hammer the point home, but if you look on page 276, planning mitigation, paragraph 3, from 23rd of January 2023, we will have to inspect every flat entrance fire door. Right? Fire doors mentioned, and the last sentence says this is currently a risk as we are yet to implement the programme. It mentions fire door, and we haven't done anything. So I would say that you can't put ongoing for that because it can't be any more risky than a fire door that hasn't been inspected.
Well, I think a lot of inspections have to be done, so we need some figures.
Can I add something to that? There are some buildings whose fire doors were changed after the Grand Hotel fire. They were then found to be not up to standard and they were removed. They were then refitted and they didn't fit. They had to be, so they had like 3 or 4 doors already. So when it's open, it could be lots of different doors because the clarification and discovering that some fire doors, which were supposedly 30 minutes safe, weren't. So that's, some of them were in good faith fitted, some of them were badly fitted in good faith, and then they had to be changed. So there were at least 3 lots of new doors in a couple of buildings that I know of.
I know we put orders in, and by the time the orders came, the regulations had changed.
But fire safety jumps off the pages.
Yeah, the optics of this are poorly.
They really are, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have another question?
No.
Okay.
I've hammered that home.
There's no financial risk here, with particular regard to the point we just talked about earlier, that the financial quantum of any settlements that are required could either impact the individual project, might also be bundled into this one too about failure to manage the impact of inquiry hearings. Wherever you want to put it, it doesn't appear to be here. And that could be a considerable impact. So my suggestion
It
would
could. So I suppose
but that risk is all about could.
In terms of risk 11, so the failure to effectively address the medium-term budget challenge, whilst it doesn't name that issue specifically, which I take your point, that would be
I was thinking it would belong in risk 11, that's why I mentioned that.
It's a point that we can take away that language.
Yeah.
If you specifically name the issue then.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other points? I mean, we could be all night on this.
I think it does need a revamp.
Which we'll consult you, we'll talk to you about the different ways in which we can do that.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Have those conversations with Chief Executive as well.
Any other questions on that? In which case then, we've looked at it, we've commented, you've got some thoughts to take away. Can we now move on then to item number 10? Yet again, it's going to be presented by Mr. Hughes.
I believe so, yes. So the actual tracker. So again, the way the tracker is set out is at each meeting we endeavour to capture, I work with Callum to make sure we capture the actions which need to be added, identified in the minutes, added into the tracker. We need to make sure actually that we circulate this to you earlier. I think so once we've got the minutes, Callum, it'd be good if we can put the tracker out again, so that actually the committee and then officers are clear in terms of the work that needs to be done. What we do is we leave on the first table anything that we have completed, so it's paused there to take any questions on any specific items on the tracker that any of the committee would like to raise. So,
Yeah. So number 65, I'm happy for that to be taken up to the item. Page 300. So I'm happy that can be removed. That's been
On 39, on page 298, about the breakdown of seniority of related staff, which, do we have anything about that? Are we still working on that?
We are still.
This is something that is there.
Well, for the last 2 years, so if you were asking me about 19, 20 and 2021, for the first 2 years, 2018 and 19, I think we are going to have to go through HR establishment line by line because of the nature of the people that supported Grenfell and the tragedy. Some of them were external, but also some existing staff were repurposed across to support Grenfell. So we are going to do a line by line, almost individual by individual to look at that. So we haven't got that yet. However, so it must stay open. So this is my last meeting. So it will change my name, and I will make sure that there are an alternative dedicated to this particular action to take that forward. So we haven't lost. So with me going, it doesn't lose its action. It will come forward in future, but we've just got to do that.
Where are you going?
Sorry, you can't just throw that in and finish the answer to the question, then I'll have an interrogation.
Well, I wanted to give you the assurance, because obviously everyone does know, I wanted you to give the assurance that it won't be lost. But it is going to require a line by line to look at that individual person. Yeah.
It's one of the top questions I get asked.
And I think it's because so many of our own internal staff we used and just reprioritise over to Grenfell that really that's what you want to be capturing, as well as just the external agency staff. Any other questions on that?
No, where are you going?
So tracker ended.
I'll come back to that at the end.
Okay.
Yes, that makes more sense to me.
Okay.
So I've got, number 77, on page 303, we've got this supplementary key internal risks paper. Will this be provided for every audit committee meeting now, or only for this as a one?
So we provide that normally with the annual audit plan, Councillor. So that, again, when we come back in February, March time, we'll have that as a standard part of the annual audit plan.
Thank you.
Will that be removed?
Yes.
Good. Thank you for that. Added and removed and tidied up. So thank you for that. Can we then move on to item number 11, please? Any other business items? We're going to
Very brief part B, I think. Yeah.
Any other items for part A? Thank you for that. Karen, do you want to briefly tell us, then we'll move into part B? You don't have to.
No, I don't mind. So I unfortunately leave Kensington at the end of the month, 28th of October, to take up the role as Director of Finance and Section 151 Officer at West Sussex County.
Oh, she lives.
Can I just put on record, thanks, I haven't done 2 meetings, but I do know from all the other various meetings I've done when I was on the regional team, how hard you work and how clear you make things, I think that.
She's also very nice, you know.
There you go.
She's a very